guys, and welcome to the Heijunka section of the stability series. Now in this section we'll be covering leveling, a basic Heijunka calculation, as well as the basics of single minute exchange of dies. But before we get started, I'll give you a little illustration about Heijunka. Now Muda is the Japanese term for unevenness. Now if you go to a grocery store, you'll notice that certain lines will have more people in line than others. That is a form of Muda. You also notice that depending on the time of day, lines will be longer and shorter. Again, that's a form of unevenness. So in a recent trip to Walmart, I noticed how they were attacking Muda. They have a digital board that tells the customer which line to go to. So once the cashier clears a customer, a button is pushed, and then the digital board lights up with that particular cash register's number. The next customer proceeds to that cash register. This is a way of evening lines and fighting Muda. So while I was at Walmart, I was leafing through a Cosmo magazine, and I came across the Muda diet. Conventional knowledge tells us that we should have 5 to 7 servings of breads and grains, 4 servings of vegetables, 2 to 3 servings of meats, and eat fats and oil sparingly. The Muda diet follows the same principle but over erratic periods and quantities. So whereas the food pyramid recommends these foods daily, the Muda diet recommends that I eat all meats for 2 weeks, then switch to grains and breads for 8 weeks, and then to vegetables for 1 month. And then I can reward myself by eating pure lard for 3 weeks. I decided to give it a shot, and after a solid 4 months of the Muda diet, I began noticing my body changing. It seems no matter how active I stayed, the pounds just kept piling on. This is me just 6 months after the video footage you just saw on Walmart. How about a more leveled approach? Perhaps the old food pyramid made sense after all. A Heijunka or leveled approach with balanced meals, meals with all food groups represented, eaten frequently throughout the day and in small predictable quantities, would help me once again look like a Greek god. Now, this illustration about the Muda diet may seem silly, but this is often how we treat our external customers by batching their orders. Now, this is how we can use leveling to help our internal workforce. Remember the paper airplane exercise? If you recall, worker 4 had way too much to do with 4 folds, while worker 1 only had 1 fold. The resulting system produced 57 pieces of WIP. We can redistribute work and level load the line to look like this. This is another way we can use Heijunka to fight Muda in our internal processes. If you recall from the waste series, Muda is the waste of unevenness. Now we use Heijunka to combat Muda. Now what do I mean by unevenness? We know that customers, both internal and external, can be erratic at times. So we try to create an environment with even level pull so the customer can pull what's needed in a calm, even manner. We try to pace the timing in which we replace those items that have just been pulled, and then we try to sequence the items in which we're replacing in a calm, even manner. So this is what I mean by level pull. If you recall from our inventory section, the customer is given an option of taking any color plane from finished goods. We create a pull-friendly environment by giving the customer the option to pull what is needed so he doesn't feel compelled to hoard. Whatever is taken, the system reacts in a calm, level manner to replace those goods that were pulled. Now this is what I mean by level pacing. This system could be very volatile if we change the pace and production to react to short-term changes. Level pacing teaches us that short-term changes in pace at which the customers pull are generally noise, and a sustained, calm, and level pace producing the takt time is what is actually needed for long-term stability. Finally, level sequence means we attempt to balance the sequence in which we replenish what has to be produced. So obviously, customers don't consume all of one product, green squares for example, then all red triangles. So why do we produce this way? Using a level sequence, we mix the order in which we produce to align better with how the customers consume products. Now, traditionally, efficiency was measured in high machine utilization. Now, when setup times were 24 hours or more, it just made financial sense to spread the cost of that setup across a large batch of items. Now, setup times have since dropped, but people still keep that mentality. So they use machine utilization and they try to hide setup across a large batch of items. So you can see here the bar represents the total material, labor, and setup cost for producing a single item in a batch. Obviously, the setup cost is very high and it would be wasteful to produce only 1 unit with such high setup costs. So this is what our cost would look like if we produce 5 units after setting up. Notice the per unit cost has gone down. Now imagine if we produce 25 units. You can see how one could easily fall into the trap of maximizing batches to hide setup cost. Now you can see the relationship between setup and batch size. Now what some people try to do to minimize the setup cost is to maximize their batch size. That's one approach. But the alternative is to minimize the setup time and then minimize the batch size to correspond to that smaller setup time. So here's our original diagram again. Now, if we apply setup reduction, you can see the impact it has to the total cost model per unit. Once we reach this state, we're free to produce as many or as few units as we wish because it costs just about the same to produce 1 unit 5 units, or 25 units. At this state, producing in smaller lots is to our advantage. This is what I mean by scaling your batch size to your setup time. One of the biggest benefits to Heijunka is the reduction in lead time. So this is what the lineup would look like without Heijunka, and this is what it looks like with Heijunka. So if I was waiting to receive a blue unit, I would have to wait until the end of the production run. See how long this takes? Now, if the lineup was level, this is how long I would need to wait for a blue unit, only a fraction of the time. Now, another benefit is a reduction in liability when producing a defect. In my traditional model, let's assume I got a blue unit and I found out it was defective. I'd call up the factory and they'd most likely find that all the blue units in that production run were defective. Now, they need to produce an entire lot of blue units to replace these defects. Now, in the Heijunka model, the same blue unit could be defective, but only one was produced in the production run, so it cost the company a lot less to replace it. A benefit related to defect liability is flexibility. In our original scenario, if one defective blue unit revealed that the entire batch of blue units was defective, then the producer has very limited flexibility to rework those defects. Long production runs of other color units would force the producer to either break into the middle of another unit's production run or double the batch of the blue units on the next run. Either way, this drives up cost or waiting time for me as the customer. Now, in the Heijunka model, the company has a lot more flexibility in inserting a single blue unit into the production run. Placing a single blue unit into the production run or running a batch of 2 blue units is far less disruptive in this scenario than it would have been in the first. We know that inventory ties up cash, and too much can cripple a company. In our original model, this could be the case. Because at any given moment, the production sequence could shift and we could find the entire batch is defective, we need to keep at least an entire batch's worth of raw material on hand. Now, the same assumptions hold true for the Heijunka model, but because the batch sizes are so small, one piece in this case, we can hold far less inventory on hand than if we didn't have the level production run. This same scenario applies to finished goods inventory. The customer in our original state has learned that he needs to hoard product when it is available because lead times are so long. This means, as a producer, we need to hold a lot of finished goods because we have inadvertently trained our customers to behave this way. Now, if we demonstrate to our customers over time that we can produce what is needed, when it is needed, quickly and in small batches, the customer will learn that hoarding is unnecessary. This allows us to decrease finished goods inventory and free up cash. Companies that successfully implement Lean have a good grasp on static and dynamic scheduling. A dynamic model is purely reactive. In our factory, we're very confident that customers order 5 of each color unit during any given month. We could, in theory, run 5 of each color in a row every month and this would satisfy customer demand. But instead, our dynamic scheduling model functions like a giant black box. Orders go in and the black box tells us what to run next. As a result, there's little predictability as to how long it will take to begin production on these green units. All we can tell you is that on average, it'll take 15 days before the first green unit will begin in production. Now, this is average. Our system is dynamic, so you can influence it by getting a regional sales manager involved or by befriending the production manager. Then your lead time is 1 day. If the production manager decides the high five you gave him during the last golf outing wasn't convincing enough, then you'll wait 60 days or more. This is why dynamic scheduling is so dangerous. Now notice the static loop we have on the bottom. Having the discipline to establish a static loop is what opens the gate for Heijunka. As a quick note, when I say static, I don't mean you won't have the leeway to make adjustments. You'll need to adjust slightly over time to produce the changes in customer demand. First, 5 units of yellow, then 5 units of blue, then 5 units of red, then 5 units of green on a set static cycle. This is set and no amount of chumming up or threats will change this. Now, if someone asks when they'll see another green unit run, you can tell them in exactly 16 days a green unit will pop off the end of the line. Again, locking down and having the foresight to create a static schedule is the first step to making Heijunka work. Now let's take it to the next level. We apply setup reduction so you can reduce batch sizes to lots of one piece. Now, in this static model, you can see if someone just consumed their last green unit, they'll need to wait exactly 4 days before another green unit will pop off the end of the line. Notice we're running in 4-day static loops in this scenario as opposed to 20-day static loops in the original static loop without Heijunka. Either case is much more advantageous to the dynamic black box you saw previously. Finally, notice that 20 days is the absolute max lead time for any batch of any color in this static loop. In the dynamic model, there is theoretically no max lead time. This means your order may never make it through the production system. The final and most important advantage to leveling is shortening order to cash. In our original model, we have to wait to the end of the entire production run of blue units to get paid for them all at once. But in the second scenario, we can get paid faster and in smaller increments. Now, this may not seem like a big deal, but imagine if your company decided to start paying your salary once a year. Would you be fine with that? Obviously, we've grown accustomed to getting paid weekly or bi-weekly in small increments of our annual salary. Using that same logic, we need to find creative ways to get our company paid faster and in smaller increments. So again, traditionally, we like to run large batches. We like low variation. Again, people like to villainize Ford by saying you can have any color as long as it's black. Then we want to minimize the number of setups in a traditional run. And we always want to run the largest batches first in a mixed model system. To batch would be something like this. You visit a doctor and he tells you you need your tonsils out. The doctor tells you setting up the operating room is very expensive, so you need to come back the third week of next month because that's when he does all of his tonsil cases at once. Minimizing total setups would be something like this. The same scenario with the doctor, you need your tonsils out, but it's expensive to set up. So he tells you to come back when you need your appendix taken out, you have a broken arm, and he gives you a good look and says you might want to think about that liposuction too. This way I can take care of everything at once and set up the operating room once. Is this how you want to be treated as a patient? Do you realize this is often how we treat our clients when we push orders around and batch them in the name of efficiency? So this is the traditional approach to running production. Notice we're running 4 types of product: blue, yellow, red, and green. And we're producing all 4 types over 4 weeks. Traditionally, managers thought that running the largest orders first was most efficient. So the blue units are run first in this model. Now take a look at the little truck at the bottom of the board. This truck takes 1 type of each unit to a client. Notice that the truck has to wait until the 4th week before it can complete an order and take it to the customer. So to compute our Heijunka ratio, we take 4 types divided by 4 weeks, and this gives us a ratio of 1.0. So Heijunka, or leveling, is measured in the form of EPEX, which stands for every part every X. So you have every part every month, every part every 3 weeks, every part every week. It's best to run every part as frequently as possible. So in your mixed model system, obviously running it every week is better than running it every month. Who knows, maybe you can break this down and run every part every day. The more you can reduce setup time and reduce batches, this number actually gets smaller, which improves your EPEX number. Now in a lean environment, we like to run in small batches. Lean environments also thrive under high product variation. We try to maximize the number of setups, not minimize, and we like to level mixed products. Smaller batches actually run first rather than last. Remember, running the smallest batches first get us paid faster. So we're still running the same 4 types of units, but we run the green units first because there are only 7 in total to produce. Now take a look at the truck at the bottom of the board. It has all 4 types loaded by the 3rd week of production. So our Heijunka ratio is 4 divided by 3, or 1.33. This is a 33% gain over the original run just by sequencing production from smallest to largest. So now let's get into a real Heijunka calculation. We know the monthly demand for each product. Each month the customer wants 20 blues, 9 yellows, 8 reds, and 7 greens. I divide these by 4 to get a weekly demand. Obviously I can't produce in fractions of units, so I round to the nearest whole number. Then I multiply by 4 again to get a rounded month of what I need to produce. Now I have to check my math to make sure I'm not producing too much or too little of one product. I check my rounded month versus my original monthly demand. I see that blue and red work out perfectly, but I'm producing 1 too few yellow and 1 too many green if I went with a rounded month. So I finally make this adjustment during the last week of production. So during the last week of the month, I'll make 1 more yellow and 1 less green than I would in a normal week. The math rarely works out perfectly, so keep in mind that you'll have to have an adjustment period just like this. So let's apply our math to our production sequence. We're still running the smallest batch size first. We chose to run red before green because the difference between the two is negligible. Notice the truck fills up with all 4 types of units within 1 week. We divide 4 types by 1 week and get a Heijunka ratio of 4.0. That's a 200% gain from the second run and a 400% gain from the original. So this is a very basic Heijunka board. First thing you probably notice, there are 4 different colors: red, green, yellow, and blue. These represent the 4 different color planes that we built during the simulation. You probably also notice that there are 4 different columns: week 1, week 2, week 3, and week 4 of production. So this board right now represents a full month's worth of production. Now it works really simple. What I do is pull the withdrawal Kanban and send it into the system. This triggers a red plane to be built. Now, the next thing that we built, again, is another red plane. Send it into the system, it would come out, followed by a green plane, and so on and so forth for week 1. So you can see that all these are pretty evenly sequenced right now, so we don't have too much of one being produced at once. In theory, I could sequence this all over, so all the blues are built at once, all the yellows, and all the greens, and all the reds. But obviously, we want to balance and level load what's being produced every single week. So this is why they call this the central nervous system of our lean environment, because this literally controls the pulling, the pacing, and the sequencing for the entire shop floor. Next, I want to relate value and batch. Now, this is kind of tough for people to swallow, and people get upset at this, but I contend that only the first piece in any batch is value add. Now, if you don't believe me, let's take for a moment if we consider the entire batch value add. We would make a bigger batch, and that's actually opposite of what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to minimize batch sizes. So, if you believe that, you realize that there's waste in every batch. The customer only needs one right now, but they're buying in the size of a batch because that's the size in which you produce it. Again, I know that's a tough pill to swallow. Even though you're changing the form, fit, or function, which is by definition value, only the first piece in your batch is actually value add. The rest of the batch is just along for the ride. Keep this in mind, especially when you're value stream mapping. The time associated with producing the entire batch should not be taken as value added time. Yes, this means only a fraction of a second may be value add for a lead time that takes months. So here are the major steps. First, we need to understand demand. And don't just skim over this. Oftentimes, if you study the data that the customer is actually giving you, you can find that they're a lot more predictable than you think they are. Then we need to reduce setup time using SMED. Reduce batch size. Now remember, these two always go coupled. Don't just do setup reduction. You have to reduce batch size to correspond to setup reduction, or else it's pointless. Reduce inventory down the line and upstream, and then shorten the pay cycle. Remember, that's what this all boils down to, is Ohno's diagram of order to cash. We have to compress that. Finally, rinse and repeat. Do this over and over again. So Shigeo Shingo is the pioneer behind single-minute exchange of dies, or SMED. Now, I love SMED because once you combine SMED with batch size reduction, that's when lean thinking really starts to take shape. He started out in 1950 in a Mazda plant, and they were producing 3-wheeled vehicles on 3 very large presses. He approached the plant manager and asked if he could work on setup reduction. This is where he developed the concepts of internal and external work. The plant manager wasn't thrilled about this, but he went ahead and let it go. And 7 years later, in 1957, he continued this work at Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. And then in 1969, he took it over to Toyota, where we see it today. Single-minute exchange of dies refers to the ability to change over a machine that is running good product to running good product of a different type in 9 minutes or less. Single minute refers to 9 minutes being a single digit of time. You're probably already familiar with the pit stop example. During a race, a car stops at a pit stop for refueling and a change of tires. The crew works to minimize this time.